And since Peter's a shorter letter than we've done yet, there's obviously not as much intro material to go over. But one thing that is important to note is that Peter and Paul were aware of each other, okay, and not just of each other, but aware of each other's writings, okay. Now we won't see that until we get into 2 Peter, but it is something that Peter brings up in his letter, because he'll specifically say Paul brings up some pretty interesting stuff that's challenging and everything else. And so it clearly shows Peter is aware of what Paul is writing, and that Paul is aware of what Peter's doing and what Peter's writing, and so on and so forth. And so the reason that that's important is because of the fact that they're going to say a lot of the same things. Okay? We just saw there that Peter, like Paul, writes to the Gentiles about how they're part of the new Israel now. Okay? We saw that in Romans. Peter's going to talk about how we're born into a new hope, a new identity, and a new family. We saw that in Luke. We saw that Peter's going to talk about how life's hardships should draw us closer to God. Where do you think we already studied that? Which book of the Bible do you think we studied already that discussed suffering and hardships?
Job?
Yeah, Job would be one of them. Ecclesiastes. Okay? I mean, the idea that, hey, life isn't always going to go good. Even if you follow God, life isn't always going to go well. All right? But you still need to trust in God, because that's the only life worth living. Okay? And we'll see that in the Psalms too when we get to that. And then Peter's going to discuss proper roles for God's people and submission and so forth. And we just saw that in Ephesians. All right. So these connections exist not just because they were contemporaries. It doesn't just exist because they were writing to kind of share the same idea and that they came from the same background. But it really exists because of the Spirit. The reason that you're going to see this overarching theme and connection in the Bible is because the Spirit is working through each and every one of these texts. The next thing that we'll need to watch for as we go through this book is that Peter's specifically writing a message of hope to people who are suffering. Okay? So by the time that Peter writes his letters, the most intensive suffering for Christians hadn't yet started. Okay, he did write this likely under Nero. Nero was one of the worst, but all the same, they hadn't even started going through the most intense of the persecution just at this point. But what are some things that people might have us go through trials for today? What are some things that the world might do that when we say, no, we're not going to do that, they're going to sit there and either make fun of you or harass you or whatever else?
So school?
What do you mean?
Like, I don't want to go back to school. They're harassing me to go to school.
That's not the same thing. What kind of things does the world say you should do, and Jesus says do something else?
Drugs.
Drugs? Okay. Drugs, alcohol. What else? What's some other stuff that people talk about at school that you know isn't right?
Sexual activities.
Okay. All right. And I'm going to put underneath this, because it's not just like the physical sexual activities. It's not just that pressure that one of you may face from a significant other, or even from just some random person to just say, come sleep with me or whatever. I'm also going to put under here porn. Okay? Because people laugh about this. Okay? If you watch some TV shows today, people sit there and bring it up like it's a joke. And it's not. And so that's something else that's going to come up, is that people are going to sit there and go, here, just look at this or whatever. And you know, for a long time, we've sat there and looked at the guys on this, but this is becoming a growing problem for young ladies too. So this is not just a guy's problem anymore. What are some other stuff that might come up? There you go.
I was about to say pollination, but that didn't sound
No, definitely not pollination. Politics. All right.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, there's not necessarily anything in particular wrong with politics, but it's the way that people participate in some of these conversations on politics. Okay? It's the way that we dehumanize others as we talk about politics. That can be an issue. You might hold one certain opinion about it based on your beliefs. Okay? Your beliefs might tell you, I believe this particular thing about politics, and that can swing either way. Okay? You know, your beliefs about politics might swing you in some instances towards what some Democrats believe. In some instances, it might swing you towards what some Republicans believe. And either way, you're going to have people harass you for either one of those beliefs. Okay? Let's see here. What about fighting? How common is it for somebody to sit there and go, well, they came after me, I'm going to go after them? I mean, is that pretty typical? I mean, you know, I can't tell you how many people, even kids that have grown up in the church and been baptized, that have told me, well, my parents told me that I could deck someone if they hit me. Is that what Jesus calls us to? No. All right. Jesus absolutely does not call us to this idea that if someone decks you, you don't sit there and go, oh, it's on now. All right.
You just let them hit you?
Depends. All right. It depends on how what's going on. I mean, if they're harassing you for the way that you believe, yeah. Because Jesus sat there and took such brutal punishment for trying to express himself as Christ. You know? And in some cases, there might be times when you need to defend yourself, but you don't have to strike back. I'll give you guys a really great example that I was really surprised with when I was growing up in high school. There was a kid that had come from really bad circumstances. I mean, his whole family did drugs and all the rest of the stuff. As far as I knew, growing up, he didn't exactly live the most exemplary life. But as he was going throughout high school, he was really trying to focus on sports so that he could get into college. Cleaned up his act a lot. But one night he went to a party, and some kid got drunk, thought that this guy was trying to hit on his girlfriend, showed up the next day in the middle of lunch and started decking the kid. And this kid didn't do anything in response. He literally put his hands up like this because he didn't want to lose a scholarship. All right, and our school had a zero tolerance policy. The universities have a zero tolerance policy that if you're involved in any kind of fight, you're out. But because he made it very clear he was not involved, that he was allowing this to happen, not only did the school not suspend him for a single day, he kept all of his scholarships, he kept his full ride to the university he was going to and everything. All right? It's a powerful thing. What about gossip? When somebody all of a sudden starts coming up to you and saying,
Did you know that Kobe's got stinky breath? His breath is horrible. I don't like Kobe. All right, and you all of a sudden stop them and go, I don't want to be a part of this conversation right now. If you've got a problem with Kobe, you need to go to Kobe. All right. How do people react? Oh no, I wasn't trying to say anything bad. I was just pointing out an observation. You try and come up with excuses for it. People try and come up with excuses for it because they want to keep doing it. All right.
And this is the world that we live in, and so we're gonna go through trials, and this is exactly who Peter is writing to. Now, the trials that Peter's audience are going through are definitely more substantial than what we go through. Okay, if we choose to not do some of the same things that the crowd is doing, we're obviously not going to be stoned to death for it. Okay, but the important thing to remember is that God's word is written not just to our generation. It's not just written to the church in Portales, New Mexico. It's not just written to the last few years. This is written to the church as a whole over the entire earth throughout eternity. All right. So, is the part about brutal suffering going to connect with you guys? No. But is it going to connect with somebody maybe in Iran or China or North Korea that's trying to spread the gospel? Yeah, it is. All right, and so that's something to keep in mind. And maybe at some point in your future, you end up encountering some kind of more intense persecution, more intense harassment for the way that you believe. This is why studying this stuff is important, is so that you can know during those moments, man, people are really coming after me for how I believe. I'm going to go back to the Bible because I know that this part in 1 Peter spoke directly to that. All right? And then the other thing that we need to keep in mind here is that Peter is specifically wanting his audience to remain a holy light even in the midst of all this suffering. All right? So, let's go ahead and get started in 1 Peter 1. We'll read through chapter 2, verse 12. So that's 25, 36. I guess that's just verse 10. That's weird. Hang on. Okay. So, verse 10 in chapter 2, 35, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Wait.
So starting in chapter 1, verse 1, but we're going to go through to chapter 2, verse 10. Alright? 3, 4, 5, 6, 12. I think if we do 2 verses each, that still should be good. So, alright.
We'll start off this side.
Alright, there you go. Weston.
Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to God's elect, exiles scattered throughout the province of Pontus,
Galatia. Cappadocia.
Asia, and
Bithynia. There you go.
According to...
No, 2.
Oh, it was 2.
No, that was just verse 1.
Oh.
who have been chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father through the sanctifying work of the Spirit, to be obedient to Jesus Christ and sprinkled with his blood. Grace and peace be yours in abundance. Now you can.
Okay. Blessed be the God and the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to his great mercy, he has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, to an inheritance that is
Perishable,
unfulfilled, and unfading, kept in heaven for you,
who through faith are shielded by God's power until the coming of the salvation that is ready to be revealed in the last time. In all this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials.
These have come so that the proving Yes.
Mhm.
Your faith a greater work than gold, which perishes even through by fire, may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed through you. Though you have not seen him, you love him, and even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and
Inexpressible.
inexpressible grace.
Obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Concerning this salvation, the prophets who prophesied about the grace that was to be yours searched and inquired carefully.
It was revealed to them that they were not serving themselves but you, when they spoke of the things that have now been told to you by those who have preached the gospel to you by the Holy Spirit sent from heaven. Even angels long to look into these things. Be holy, therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. As obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had when you lived in ignorance. But just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do.
For it is written, be holy because I am holy. Since you call a Father who judges each person's work
Impartially.
impartially, without return his foreigners here and the
For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver or gold that you were redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect.
He was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Through him, believe in God, who has raised him from the dead, and glorify him. And so your faith and hope are in God.
Now that you have purified yourselves by obeying the truth, so that you have sincere love for each other, love one another deeply from the heart. For you have been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living and enduring word of God.
Clearly, my math was off. So, for all people are like grass, and all their glory is like the flowers of the field. The grass withers and the flowers fall, but the word of the Lord endures forever. And this is the word that was preached to you. Therefore rid yourselves of all malice and all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and slander of every kind. Like newborn babies crave pure spiritual milk, so that by it you may grow up in your salvation, now that you have tasted that the Lord is good. As you come to him, the living stone, rejected by humans but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. For in Scripture it says, See, I lay a stone in Zion, a chosen and precious cornerstone, and the one who trusts in him will never be put to shame. Now to you who believe, the stone is precious, but to those who do not believe, the stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, and a stone that causes people to stumble, and a rock that makes them fall. They stumble because they disobey the message, which is also what they were destined for. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Once you were not a people, but now you are the people of God. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. All right. Anything in there that you guys in particular caught on to?
In 1 Peter 14, I like the, it says, as obedient children, do not conform to the evil desires you had lived in ignorance. So kind of going towards the modern day trials.
Yeah.
Don't fall short to them.
And he specifically says the ones that you used to, right? So this is not just a matter of, okay, this is stuff that's going on in the world around you. This is stuff that you used to be a part of, okay? And so Peter, it's Peter's direct statement to them of, hey, make sure that you're changing, that you're being transformed out of that way of living. So, anybody else? Yeah.
1 Peter verse 8.
Okay.
This is, though you have not seen him, you love him, and even though you do not see him now, who believe in him are filled with an inexpressible and glorious joy.
Yeah.
Which many people are like, how do you believe in God you can't see? I just remind me of that.
Good. Anybody else?
Well, kind of going off of Maddie's verse, what we learned yesterday from the second speaker, don't conform, don't, the Bible does not conform to us, we conform to the Bible.
Yeah. One, two, five. Good. Anything else? All right. Of course. All right. So real quick, a review of what we had for the reading challenges this week. We talked about how, like Israel, we're a chosen people who live exiled from the promised land. Did we ever live in Israel or Judah? No. So what kind of promised land are we talking about here?
Eternal life.
Yeah, the presence of God. Okay? And so, because of our rebellion, we can't live in the presence of God right now. But like Israel, who is expelled from Jerusalem for her sin, they had that hope of eventually returning to Jerusalem, which they saw as being able to be near the presence of God. Okay? And so this is what we have. We share that same hope. In this life, we're going to experience suffering, but wisdom from God teaches us to be patient. Okay? We talked about this a lot. It doesn't matter what kind of suffering or trials it might be. It might be outside pressures. It might be people that are pressuring you to do something that you know is wrong. It might be internal pressures. You might have personal issues that come up. As you guys get older, you're going to experience more financial pressures. Some of you guys might be facing physical pressures like illnesses or something that come up. Some of you guys might experience or have experienced mental pressures that come up. But godly wisdom teaches us to be patient and to endure this kind of stuff. Okay? That this is just a part of this life. Okay? And this kind of gets into the last point here, is that it's through endurance, through this suffering, that we're going to be a light to the world around us. So yeah, maybe you do suffer through anxiety. Maybe there is a depression, or maybe there's a physical illness or whatever that you suffer through. The ability to endure through that and to cling to God during those moments will be a light to the people around you to say, you know what, yeah, I do kind of grapple and struggle with this right now, but I have a hope that eventually that this part of my life, this suffering with this particular thing, this is only momentary. That eventually God's going to restore everything, and man, I won't have to deal with this at all anymore. All right? I hate allergies. I don't know if anybody else in here suffers through allergies. I hate it. I'm allergic to just about everything. Okay? I'm excited for the day that I don't have to sit there and worry about going outside and having just like a ton of drainage start going down my nose. All right? And that's minor in comparison to what other people go through. I know, I'm just giving an example. Okay? All right. So what we read through today, 1 Peter 1:13 through 2:10. I don't know why I put 12 up there. The first thing that we're going to see here is that Peter's got this call to action, okay? That he wants us to be holy as Christ is holy, as God is holy, okay? And so one thing that you guys can notice as you go throughout Peter's letter is that he's going to specifically continue to tell you, don't do this, all right? Maddie pointed out chapter 1, verse 14, don't conform to the evil desires of the world. But then he immediately follows that up with, be holy. It's because if I tell you, don't think about the number 9, what are you doing right now?
The number 9.
All right, this is something we've talked about in our young marrieds thing with the love and respect class. He brought that up, that if all you do is tell somebody what not to do, that's all they're going to focus on. And for the longest time in the church, that's what we focused on, was telling people, don't do drugs, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. Well, that's all we've given people to focus on. And instead what we should have been doing was reminding everybody what we should be focusing on, which is being holy. Obeying the example that God has given us. All right? So Peter says that we're to be strangers in the world, but we're to be friends to family. All right? Now, what we mean by that is that we're going to be friends to the family of God. We're called to be close to one another. I'm not supposed to just sit there and look at Weston and say, well, he doesn't like the same basketball teams that I like, so I'm just going to, push him aside. No. I'm going to draw close to him because he's my brother in Christ. I don't care if we disagree on sports. What does that matter? Okay? That doesn't matter. And so I'm going to draw close to him. And we're going to experience this with everybody in the church. We're going to have disagreements, but we still should be family to one another. And some of you guys may have experienced broken families, broken family relationships. Everybody pretty much does. It's a rare thing to have just this really well put together family anymore. But when we say you need to be a family, we mean that you need to love each other through all things, through all differences and all of it. Okay? And then being strangers in the world doesn't mean, oh, well, Weston doesn't believe in Jesus, so I'm going to just completely avoid Weston and never hang out with him whatsoever. No, it just means that I'm not going to do the same things that this world does, and they should look at me as a weirdo because of it. All right? So, we need to crave new life like a baby craves milk. What does a baby do the first few months of its life?
Oh, milk.
Huh?
Eating some milk.
Yeah, wants milk. What else does it do?
Cries.
Poop.
Yep. Eat, sleep, cry, poop.
It doesn't stop.
That's about all a baby does. Why? What? It's not just a matter of that's all it knows how to do. What else is going on with a baby? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when a baby is born, it goes through a lot of trauma, okay? Because a baby has gone from not having to worry about oxygen or food or anything. All that stuff was just done for the baby in the womb to, oh my word, now all of a sudden I'm in this completely weird environment. I'm seeing a whole new, bunch of things. This is really weird. Now if I poop, it's staying in my, near my bottom. What's going on? So there's this whole world of change that a baby goes through, and it's growing. It's a rapid growth. I mean, you guys have seen it. You know that, like, you'll go and you'll see your new baby nephew or cousin or niece or whatever, and then the next thing you know, you come back 2 months later and they're like 50 pounds. You're like, what happened? You're only 3 months old. Okay, this is the thing. And just in the same way, we need to realize that when we commit our lives to Christ, it should be this big change as well. That we should notice this massive change that should be occurring in our lives where we start saying, I need to dig deep. Because I've crossed over from one life to the other, and I need to take time to develop, to really grow. So when Peter is telling us to crave pure spiritual milk, what he's telling us is take time right now to really dive in. What are we talking about with pure spiritual milk? What does that look like? What would we consider to be included in pure spiritual milk?
Reading your Bible.
Reading your Bible. What else? Prayer. What else? What? What else?
Good relationships.
Good relationships. Good. Because again, what we're talking about here is a complete change from one life to the other. Okay? That doesn't mean that you immediately cut out anybody that's not in the church. It simply means that you start really focusing on the stuff that matters, the stuff that's really going to help you grow. Okay? So that's what we're talking about with pure spiritual milk. The last thing here is that he talks about Christ as the cornerstone of our life. Do you guys know what a cornerstone is?
In every house there's a corner, and there's like a stud in the corner.
Like the
Hold it up.
Right, yeah. So, we don't really see them all that much today because we don't really utilize, like, stone arches. But in a cornerstone, you've got all these rocks that are building up in this arch, and the cornerstone is the one that sits right here. Okay? So as they're building up the arch, okay, it's not an actual cornerstone. Sometimes it's called a capstone or a keystone. But regardless, the point is that as the arch is being built up to the center, they've got to support it with other stuff until that time. The cornerstone is what keeps everything together. If you were to weaken the integrity of the cornerstone, everything's going to fall apart. All right? So Peter is saying Christ should be the cornerstone of your life. As you guys are making this change, as all of us grow up, the world shapes parts of our identity. In fact, the world shapes most of our identity. Then you make this change into Christ, and that identity needs to start changing. And that's going to have to start taking a shape so that as you start noticing different things, you start saying, that doesn't belong, that's got to go. All right? That's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not like as soon as you're baptized, you're going to hear this, voice come over the heavens saying, well done, Chad, my good and faithful servant. Listen to him, this is who I love, all right? That's not the way it's going to work. You're not going to have like this sudden revelation of all these different things that are wrong in your life that you need to change. It's going to be a gradual process. That's why we call it transformation. It's not just a one-time event. It's continual. As you guys return to school, live holy as God has called you to be. Know that you're going to experience trials as you commit to this life. But be strong in your commitment to Christ over the world. All right. While you guys are finishing writing that down, no activity tonight. All right. We got Sunday evening worship. But that's it. There's no dedicated youth thing tonight. Next Sunday, though, we've got our back-to-school batch. We're going to do the color war. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Invite some friends, but also make sure that you bring a shirt that you can change into that you do not mind getting dirty. Okay? So that's all I got. Love you guys. You're awesome. Let's head to worship.
Sir.
I can't believe you've done this.
Sir. Stop it.
Oh,